My ex-husband died last week. It still feels surreal to say that out loud. Even after everything he did, everything he didn't do, I never thought the end would come like that. No warning, no goodbye. Just a phone call from a number I didn't recognize, telling me Grant was gone. It wasn't until 3 days after that phone call that I heard from her. Sabrina, his wife, or I guess now, his widow. She didn't say sorry. She didn't ask how our son was doing. All she said was, if your kid needs closure or whatever, we're doing a small family dinner after the memorial. He can come, but let's keep this respectful, okay? For the kids. That was it. No warmth, no decency. Just a passive-aggressive text, like she was doing us a favor by allowing my son, his son, to attend. I didn't reply right away. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I showed the message to my boy, Eli. He was sitting on the couch in his dinosaur pajamas, his legs tucked under him, rereading the last letter his dad had sent. Grant used to send them every so often. Handwritten notes on yellow paper. It was his way of staying in touch without really staying present. This last one, it had arrived just 2 days before the accident. I hadn't read it. It was addressed directly to Eli, and I didn't want to violate that trust. But Eli hadn't opened it either. He just carried it around like it was something sacred, folded carefully like it might fall apart if he let it go. When I told him about the dinner, I expected him to say no, maybe cry, maybe get angry. But instead, he looked down at the letter in his hands and said softly, I think Dad would want me to go. He was 9 years old, and somehow, in that moment, he sounded older than I'd ever heard him sound before. I nodded and told him I'd be with him every second, that I'd protect him if anything got uncomfortable. But the truth? I had no idea what we were walking into. Suburban driveway evening. Narrator continues. We arrived at Grant's mother's house around 6. It was this huge white colonial with columns out front and a flag swaying on the porch. I hadn't stepped foot inside that house since the day Grant and I signed our divorce papers. His mother, Joanna, made it clear a long time ago that she didn't consider Eli family, or me for that matter. As we walked up to the door, Eli reached up and took my hand. His palm was sweaty. He looked up at me and said, Do you think they'll be nice? I didn't know how to answer, so I lied. I think Dad would want them to be. When the door opened, Sabrina was standing there with a forced smile and a glass of wine in her hand. She looked me up and down like I'd just tracked mud on her rug. Oh, you came. Before I could even respond, Eli stepped forward and said, Hi, I'm Eli. He reached out his hand like a little gentleman, and to Sabrina's credit, she took it, barely. The rest of the evening blurred together. Awkward introductions, stilted conversation. People pretending we weren't there. Eli sat quietly, eating his food, occasionally glancing around like he was looking for someone, maybe hoping Grant would appear, smiling, laughing like he used to. But instead, it happened. Right after dessert, while the kids were playing and the adults were sitting around the long dining table, sipping drinks and swapping stories, Sabrina said it, loud enough for everyone to hear. We don't really want your kid around ours. It's confusing for them. You know, the whole situation. And that's when Joanna, wine glass half raised, laughed, a cruel, dismissive laugh. He's not really Grant's anyway. Let's not pretend. I froze. So did Eli. But then, my 9-year-old son stood up. He walked back into the room, eyes locked on the table, his little hands trembling. He pulled the folded letter from his hoodie pocket, and then he said something that changed everything. If I'm not his, then why did he write me this? You don't really prepare for single motherhood, even when you see it coming. The slow unraveling of a marriage, the missed calls, the empty chairs at school plays. You still hold out hope that maybe, just maybe, they'll show up again, that they'll be who they promised to be. That was Grant. He was brilliant when I met him. Funny, sharp, the kind of man who lit up a room without even trying. We met in college. I was a psychology major. He was studying business, full of big ideas and reckless charm. He talked fast, dreamed big, and when he said he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me, I believed him. For a while, it was good. We got married young. Then I got pregnant with Eli. That's when everything started to shift, slowly at first, Missed appointments, late nights, disconnected eyes. And when Eli was born, it was like Grant couldn't quite connect with reality. Like fatherhood was a coat that didn't fit him right. He held our baby like he was breakable. He loved him, I think, but from a distance. Like he didn't know how to get close. Eventually, he just stopped trying. When Eli was 3, Grant moved out. He met Sabrina within 6 months. She was everything I wasn't: polished, ambitious, from a family with money and a taste for control. Grant remarried fast, too fast. After that, we barely saw him. Eli would get letters instead. Grant said it was easier that way, less confusing for everyone. And while I hated it, I never said anything to Eli. Because every time a letter came, Eli lit up. He'd sit at the kitchen table, legs swinging off the chair, and read each word like it was gold. I never opened them. I never read over his shoulder. I wanted at least that much to be just between them. People assume kids don't notice things. They do. Eli did. He noticed when his dad stopped visiting. He noticed when other kids at school had dads show up to soccer games. He'd ask sometimes, real quiet, "Mom, do you think Dad's proud of me?" And I'd say, "Of course he is, baby. He just shows it differently." It wasn't a great answer, but it was all I had. I did everything I could to keep things stable. I worked as a school counselor. I kept Eli in the same school, in the same house. I made pancakes on Saturdays, helped with science fair projects, practiced spelling words every night. I tried to be 2 parents in one body, tired, stretched thin, but still showing up. And Eli? He never complained. He was a good kid, sweet, observant. He talked to animals like they understood him. He made cards for his classmates on their birthdays, even the ones who didn't talk to him. And every Father's Day, without fail, he'd draw a picture for Grant and tuck it into a drawer, just in case. When I got the call about Grant's accident, I was folding laundry. The voice on the other end said he lost control on a back road during a storm. No one else was hurt. It was fast. I didn't cry. I just sat on the floor and stared at a stack of towels. I waited a full day before telling Eli. He didn't cry either. He walked to his room, pulled the most recent letter from his nightstand, the one that came just 2 days earlier, and sat with it for hours. He didn't open it. He just held it, his small fingers tracing the edges like it was a map leading to something important. That night, I tucked him in and asked if he wanted to talk. He shook his head. Then the next day, the message came from Sabrina, the dinner invitation. I didn't want to go. I didn't want him to go. But Eli looked at me with those steady, serious eyes of his, the ones he gets from Grant, and said, "Mom, I need to go. I need to hear what they'll say." And maybe I should have said no. Maybe I should have protected him. But I looked at my son, a 9-year-old boy standing taller than most adults I know. And I realized he wasn't going for closure. He was going for truth. The day of the dinner, I dressed Eli in his navy sweater, the one with the little buttons on the shoulder. He picked it himself, said it made him look older. I didn't argue. He wanted to be taken seriously, and I wasn't about to deny him that. On the drive over, he was quiet. He just stared out the window, holding the envelope in his lap, still unopened. That same letter from Grant, the one we'd received 2 days before his death. He hadn't let go of it since. "You okay?" I asked gently. He nodded without looking at me. "I think I'm ready." I wish I had told him how proud I was right then. I should have, but I was too busy rehearsing polite smiles and neutral responses. I knew that house. I knew that family. And I knew how cold they could be, even around a child. The moment we pulled into the long driveway, I felt it in my chest. That sinking pressure. The porch lights were glowing soft and warm, but the inside of that house had never felt like home, not even when I was married to Grant. Sabrina opened the door, dressed in a sleek black dress with pearls that looked too expensive for a memorial dinner. She gave me that tight smile she always wore, the one that said, "You don't belong here." "Zara," she said like it tasted sour. Then, looking past me, "Eli, come in." We stepped inside. The house smelled like candles and catered food. Joanna, Grant's mother, sat at the head of the dining table with a glass of white wine in her hand, already laughing at something one of Grant's cousins said. She glanced up when she saw us and gave a slow blink, like we were some awkward interruption. "Well, you made it," she said. Not, "I'm sorry," not, How are you two holding up? Just that. Eli stood close to me, quiet and observing, the way he always did in unfamiliar territory. I could see him taking it all in. The crystal bowls, the 2 white napkins, the framed pictures of Grant and Sabrina's family on the mantel. There were none of him. Dinner began and we sat toward the far end of the table. No one made room for us in the center. The conversation floated above our heads, polite murmurs about vacation plans, Sabrina's job, someone's new Tesla. Nobody asked Eli how he was doing. At one point, a younger kid, Sabrina's daughter, I think, tried to sit next to Eli with a handful of crayons, but her mother gently pulled her away. "Not now, honey. Go draw in the playroom." It was subtle, but I saw it, and I saw Eli notice too. The small flinch, the quiet way he turned his eyes back to his plate. And then, dessert came. Joanna raised her glass and gave some kind of forced tribute to Grant, about how charming he was. Hard to love, but easy to admire. I almost choked on my water. That's when Sabrina looked at me, looked at Eli, and said it. "You know, we'd appreciate it if your child didn't play with ours. They're grieving and this situation is confusing enough already." Her voice was smooth, but every word cut. It wasn't just cruel, it was deliberate. She wanted him to feel like he didn't belong. And then Joanna added with a chuckle that made my skin crawl, "He's not really Grant's anyway. We all remember the timeline." There it was, the thing they'd always whispered, the lie they clung to like a shield. I felt my face flush. My hands tightened under the table, but before I could speak, before I could throw back every ounce of hurt I'd held for years, Eli stood up. He didn't say anything at first, just walked around the table, the envelope still in his hand. His voice was small but steady. "If I'm not his," he said, lifting the letter, "then why did he write me this?" And just like that, the laughter stopped. The room froze. Joanna blinked. Sabrina's mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to say something but couldn't form the words. Eli stood there, quiet and unshaken, holding truth in his tiny hands. And I thought, they have no idea who they're dealing with. The room went silent after Eli spoke. Not the awkward kind of silence, but the kind that lands heavy, like the air itself had thickened. Forks hovered in midair. Glasses clinked quietly as hands fumbled for something to hold onto. Eli stood there, small in size but commanding every inch of space. His hand trembled as he held out the envelope, Grant's last letter. But his voice didn't shake when he said it again. "If I'm not his, then why did he write me this?" I wanted to scoop him up and pull him away from the table. I wanted to protect him from the looks, the silence, the way some of them shifted uncomfortably, like the truth he held made them itch. But I didn't move, because I saw something in him, something fierce. Eli walked around the table slowly. He stopped at the head, right in front of Joanna and Sabrina, and placed the envelope down, carefully, deliberately. Then he looked up at Joanna, who had been so smug just moments earlier. Tiawan said, "You said I wasn't his." "But he called me his son. He always did." He turned to Sabrina. "You didn't want me here, but my dad did. He wrote me this right before he died." She blinked, stunned. Her lips were parted like she had something to say, but couldn't find the words. Eli picked up the letter and unfolded it. Slowly. I had never seen him open one of Grant's letters before. That was their sacred thing, their private corner of love in a very fractured world. But today, Eli made the choice to share it. "Dear Eli," he began reading aloud, "if you're reading this, it means something happened, maybe something bad, and if that's true, I didn't want to leave without saying what I should have said a long time ago." The words were shaky in Eli's voice, but there was something powerful in the way he said them, like he was standing on a cliff edge, refusing to back down. "You are my son, my only son, and I need you to know that even though I wasn't always the dad you deserved, I loved you." The letter went on. Every sentence was a confession, a quiet apology, a man trying to make peace with the one thing he hadn't ruined, his relationship with his son. And though Grant hadn't always been present, he had written, and what he wrote was truth. "I'm proud of you, Eli. You're better than me. Smarter, kinder, stronger. You're what I always hoped to be when I was a kid." Eli paused here, swallowed. His voice cracked a little, but he kept going. I don't know what people will say when I'm gone, but I hope someone reminds you that you're mine, because I'll always be yours. Love, Dad. He finished, folded the letter neatly again, and just like that, placed it in front of Joanna. The silence stretched. You could hear someone's spoon drop into a bowl at the far end of the table. Joanna looked down at the letter like it was glowing, like it had caught fire in front of her. Her jaw clenched, and her eyes flicked away, glassy and cornered. I watched Sabrina. She looked embarrassed, not guilty. Embarrassed. Her expression was cold, but her hands were shaking slightly, white-knuckled against the table. Finally, someone, one of Grant's cousins, muttered, "That's his handwriting. I've seen him write like that." Another voice, softer, said, "He never wrote like that to anyone else." Eli didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He turned to me, eyes calm, and walked back to my side. I put my arm around him and knelt to meet his eyes. "You were perfect," I whispered. And then I stood up. My spine straightened. My voice came out even, controlled, but firm enough to cut through the tension. "I didn't come here to convince you all. I came here because my son wanted the truth, and now you've heard it." In Grant's own words. Joanna finally spoke, her voice low and shaky. I didn't know he felt that way." I looked her straight in the eye. "You didn't care to ask. No one stopped us when we left the table. No one called out. No one laughed. For the first time in years, they listened. And for the first time ever, my son was heard. When we turned to leave the table, I felt the entire room shift behind us. Not physically, emotionally. Like the weight of everything my son had just revealed was still hanging in the air, pressing down on everyone who had once been so sure of their opinions. No one said a word, not at first. Eli's footsteps were small but steady on the hardwood floor as we moved toward the front door. I was right behind him, my hand on his shoulder, proud and furious and heartbroken all at once. But then, just as I reached for the door handle, a voice behind us broke the silence. It was Joanna. "Wait." I turned slowly. She stood at the head of the table still, but she looked different, smaller. Her shoulders weren't squared anymore. Her voice wasn't sharp. She hesitated, glancing down at the letter Eli had left in front of her. "I didn't know he felt that way. About the boy." "He has a name," I said, quietly but firmly. "Eli. He's had one since the day he was born." Joanna nodded once, her lips pressed together tightly, her eyes glassy. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or just the embarrassment of being wrong in front of a table full of people she tried to control. "Grant never talked about him much," she said. "Not to us." "He didn't have to," I replied. "He wrote it down, and my son has carried every single word." Sabrina stood up suddenly. She didn't look at me. She looked at Joanna. "This is ridiculous," she said. "It's a letter. That doesn't change the fact that he never claimed him legally. We all know how he disappeared after the divorce." I stepped forward. I hadn't planned to speak again. I really hadn't. But Sabrina's voice, that cold detachment, lit something in me. "You think love is about paperwork?" I asked. "You think biology makes someone a father? Because if so, you clearly never read any of those letters." She opened her mouth, but I didn't give her the chance. Grant may have been absent. He may have failed in more ways than one. But the one thing he never failed at, not really, was letting Eli know, in his own flawed way, that he was loved. That he was his Eli stood beside me, holding my hand now. His head was high, and I could see it in his eyes. He was done chasing approval. He wasn't here to be accepted anymore. He was here to be heard, and he had been. "My dad wrote me that letter because he knew this would happen," Eli said. "He knew you wouldn't believe it unless you saw it. But I already knew. I always knew." A hush fell again. This time it wasn't awkward. It was reflective, heavy. A few family members glanced down. One of Grant's cousins, a woman I vaguely remembered from birthdays, actually wiped her eye, and then someone else spoke. I believe him. It was Marcus, Grant's younger brother. He'd barely spoken all night, but now he stood, pushing his chair back quietly. "Grant talked about Eli once, said he was scared he'd mess him up. that he didn't know how to be a dad, but he said Eli was the best part of him. He looked at Eli. I think he really meant that. Sabrina sat back down, silent. Joanna said nothing more, and I realized in that moment the fight was over. Not because they all suddenly welcomed Eli with open arms. They didn't. But because they could no longer deny him. The truth was on the table. Written in Grant's own handwriting, spoken by a child too brave for his age. We turned again and walked toward the front door. This time, no one stopped us. No one said, "Wait." No one told my son he didn't belong. We stepped outside into the cold night air, and I knelt down to zip Eli's coat. His cheeks were red, but his eyes were calm. A storm had passed through him, and he had walked out stronger. "You okay, baby?" I asked. He nodded. "I'm not sad anymore," he said, "just tired." I pulled him close, held his little frame against me, and whispered, "You were braver than most grown-ups tonight. Your dad would be proud." He looked up at me. I think he already was. We didn't talk much on the drive home. The car was quiet except for the sound of tires humming against the road. Eli leaned his head against the window, the letter now tucked safely into his coat pocket. His eyes were heavy, not with sadness, but with something else. A kind of emotional exhaustion only a child forced to act like a grown-up could know. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You did something really brave tonight, buddy." He didn't respond right away, just gave a small nod, like he knew it was true but didn't need to hear it said out loud. And maybe he didn't, because the letter said everything. Grant's words had been more honest in that one final note than he'd ever been in person. When we got home, I helped Eli out of his coat, made him some warm milk, and tucked him into bed. As I pulled the blanket over him, he reached into his pocket and handed me the letter. "Can we keep it somewhere safe?" he asked. I kissed his forehead. "Of course." I found a small wooden box I kept in the back of my closet, the one I used to keep baby photos and hospital bracelets and those little milestones you swear you'll organize one day. I placed the letter inside gently, like it was made of glass, because in a way, it was. It had held him together, it had shattered the silence, and it had changed everything. That night, after Eli was asleep, I sat alone on the couch and thought about all the things I'd carried, the judgment, the doubt, the loneliness. For years, I'd been made to feel like Eli's presence in Grant's life was an inconvenience, a mistake, a footnote in someone else's story. But that was never the truth. Grant was flawed, yes, selfish, often, absent when it mattered most. But he had seen our son, and in his own broken, cowardly way, he'd loved him. Maybe not the way Eli deserved, but he tried. In the end, with his words, he finally gave Eli what he'd needed all along: recognition, validation, a voice. And Eli had taken that truth and held it like a torch, walking into a room full of cold, dismissive people who doubted him, and burned every lie down. That letter wasn't just proof of paternity, it was proof of love. The next morning, Eli was back to being 9. He made a Lego spaceship at the kitchen table. He asked if we could have pancakes for lunch. He laughed at a cartoon and asked if I remembered where his shark socks were. And I realized something simple and beautiful. Children bounce back, but they don't forget. They carry the things we say to them, the things we fail to say, and sometimes the things we leave behind, like a letter written in a father's shaky pen, become the loudest, most lasting truths of all. Eli never brought up that dinner again. He never asked about Joanna or Sabrina or whether they believed him. I think he understood something that even I had struggled to learn for years. You don't need everyone to believe you, just the people who matter. A few weeks later, I caught him showing the letter to his best friend, Jackson. He was holding it gently, pointing to a line where Grant had written, "You're the best part of me." Jackson asked what that meant, and Eli shrugged. I think it means I turned out better than he expected. I had to step out of the room to cry. Because he wasn't bitter. He wasn't angry. He was whole. That letter, that moment, had given him something most people don't find until they're much older: the courage to define himself. Not by someone else's approval, but by his own truth. And as for me, I learned something too, that sometimes the most powerful moments don't come with fireworks or applause. Sometimes they come from a little boy with shaky hands and a folded piece of paper who stands up and speaks, not because he wants attention, but because he deserves to be heard. They tried to laugh him out of the room, I'd later tell a friend, but he had something louder than laughter. He had proof. He had love. He had his father's words. And for Eli, that was enough. If this story moved you, if you've ever had to fight for your child to be seen, to be heard, or simply to be loved, I see you. And I hope Eli's courage reminds you that even small voices can carry enormous truth. Thank you for watching and staying with us to the very end. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps more people find it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, or who needs a reminder of what love and bravery truly look like. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me what part of Eli's story stayed with you, or share a moment when you, or someone you love, stood up and spoke your truth. And of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. There's more real-life storytelling on the way. Stories that lift voices, challenge judgment, and remind us of the power of heart. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and always protect the truth. Love.